I mean, the urge to have sex and to procreate is, after breathing and eating, the most basic urge.
Yes.
How has it been subverted?
Well, it's just in the past, we could rely upon, simple limbic system rewards
Yes.
in order to procreate. But once you have birth control and abortions and whatnot, now you can still satisfy the limbic instinct, but not procreate. So we haven't yet evolved to deal with that, because this is all fairly recent, the last 50 years or so, for birth control. So I'm sort of worried that, hey, civilization, if we don't make enough people to at least sustain our numbers, perhaps increase a little bit, then civilization is going to crumble. There's the old question of will civilization end with a bang or a whimper? Well, it's currently trending to end with a whimper in adult diapers.
Yes.
Which is depressing as hell.
Yeah. I really like that clip. I think you get to see a lot of what made Tucker the defining newsman of his era. The tough questions, just the look of that spark of intelligence and sort of critical discernment that you always see in his eyes, whenever a guest is speaking.
Yeah, I think full credit to Vic Berger, who makes those much crazier edits than I do. But if I have to keep editing these videos of these people for the cold open, I have to do something to it, or I'm gonna go crazy. Just reproducing Tucker's blank, that blank where the guest says the dumbest shit you've ever heard, and he's just like, yeah. It's just the worst. Yeah. So I'll keep experimenting.
The funny thing is, he's making the same face when he got fired. I found a picture of it.
Oh yeah, let's see.
Oh, where is that?
I didn't realize this was it.
Yeah, they brought him into the Fox office and told him that they were going to make him a main guy. Sad.
Wow.
Yeah. Sad story. I mean, you should have. You should have seen Rod Dreher in the phone booth when he got the call.
Not a dry eye in the phone booth.
Yeah. Well, there have been a lot of different theories about what happened there. Of course, there is an obvious explanation, but I've been seeing a lot of non-obvious explanations. For example, Dinesh D'Souza, I know we don't have this as a graphic, but Dinesh D'Souza tweeted that all of the Fox hosts had been ordered not to discuss his documentary 2000 Mules, I think it's called, which is his election fraud propaganda film. And Tucker went with the order, but he clearly didn't like it, and now he's gone. And there was just this weird implication that he was gone because he somehow he really wanted to talk about Dinesh's documentary, and the Fox suits wouldn't have it, and they fired him.
From my perspective, I think Tucker getting fired had to do with me. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm the one looking at this situation, right? So I don't understand how I wouldn't be involved. Does that I don't know if that really makes any sense philosophically, right? To look at a situation and you're not part of it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it clearly doesn't.
Probably something more mundane, he sexually harassed too many interns, and they're just like, well, we got to get rid of him.
Well, the particularly fun thing about the Dinesh explanation is that it's almost exactly the opposite of what there is some pretty mundane circumstantial evidence for. So Fox, of course, just settled this massive lawsuit with Dominion, which is a company that makes voting machines. And whatever, I'm old enough that it's kind of funny to me to see this come full circle, because in 2004, I think it was Dominion already, but the electronic voting machine fraud was a liberal conspiracy theory about the Bush-Kerry election in Ohio, and now it's it's come around, and in 2020 it was the MAGA conspiracy theory about the 2020 election.
Using the same reporting from the 2004 incidents off of the Brad blog, which did do a lot of pretty good election reporting at the time. Just stating facts, not conspiracies.
Yeah, I remember somebody. I'm trying to remember who. I remember seeing somebody on Twitter in 2020 saying, as the person was saying, speaking as a Air America call screener in 2004, I find it hilarious to see that this is a right-wing conspiracy theory now. But yeah, so Fox, of course, heavily aired the allegations against Dominion, and there's some ambiguity about how much different Fox hosts themselves personally said and were therefore liable for, versus how much they just, credulously nodded in a slack-jawed manner. Well, guests say, which, is not super honorable, but not really legally actionable. So that's a lot of the ambiguity about what would have happened if it had gone to court, and they'd had to actually, this had actually gone to trial, and at the last minute, Fox paid out this massive settlement, which they might be taking as a tax write-off, which is amazing, broken system. But it looks like part, like one hint about why they may have settled, and also one hint about why Tucker may be gone, is that in the discovery process that had happened so far, there were all of these texts that had come out where Tucker and other Fox hosts offered their own views about these conspiracy theories, and among friends. And it goes to what you're trying to prove in court, which is you can't sue somebody just for saying something that turns out to be false. One of the boxes you have to check is reckless disregard for the truth. And so these texts came out as part of that to try to establish reckless disregard for the truth, and whether or not it's quite fits the legal definition or not, the man, in the intuitive sense of reckless disregard for the truth, sure seemed to be, because people like Tucker Carlson, who were given a lot of credibility, however much weaselly couching there was, to people like Sidney Powell and the election fraud claims on air, were saying in the text messages things like Sidney Powell is a fucking lunatic, Donald Trump is such a crank, I'm so sick of having to defend him. And so one might speculate that, even more of the stuff would have come out had they gone to trial. And that's part of why they didn't want to, even if they, might or might not have eventually beat the case. I'm not a, lawyer or an expert on any of that. That's just rank speculation. But, and, it's also hard not to wonder if some of what he was expressing in private that came out, in public, had something to do with Tucker and Fox finally parted ways. But in any case, friend of show, his, I suspect the road won't be over for him, because it's fucking 2023 and it never is. People, it's the, Scott Fitzgerald, there are no second acts in American lives. There's going to be a second, third, fourth, fifth act. That's how this always works now. I mean, even Keith Olbermann is still out there doing something. They'll definitely, it's definitely, worst case scenario, he could join us in the podcast world. That's the absolute worst case.
Exactly. I mean, I saw a lot of people talking about how he's the only major voice, who with the on cable news, with the balls to go after like big pharma, and he's anti-war as well. All things we've covered. So I'm really those are takes that I agree with, and I'm gonna be really upset to see the anti-corporate, anti-war crusader Tucker Carlson gone from America's TV screens. Yeah, more good than harm, for sure.
My favorite anti-war thing from Tucker that we ever showed on this show was the one where he's nodding while his guest says that we don't need these like woke, effeminate people in the military. We need the kind of guys who dream of drinking blood on a while sitting on a throne of Chinese skulls. I think that was really the clip where you saw Tucker's anti-war essence.
Yep, that's where I spotted it.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think if you're going to do the sort of complete, honest assessment of Tucker's politics, I mean, there's a certain amount of anti-interventionism with like a giant China-sized exception to it, which, you know, to be fair, was inconsistent, but still was pretty disturbing somehow it manifested itself. And then he was a totally ridiculous fraud on economic populism and a complete hack on many other things, as the point about the text messages go to, and very much a demagogue on all and many other things. And, you know, again, we keep talking about him in this, you know, past tense as if he's going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. You know, it's within a month, you know, we're going to have some new Tucker clips, you know, that we'll play on this show. But life moves on in non-Tucker directions. So his long slide, you know, path from, you know, his origins. I remember when he used to, well, not his very origins. Fun fact, actually, his very origins. He was on MSNBC, you know, before he was on Fox, did Crossfire. I remember watching him on Crossfire, where he was just a straight down the line George W. Bush apologist, and in both sort of style and substance. He was very much the kind of conservative that the Chapo guys call bowtie dipshit. And then he reinvented himself as the brave, authentic, anti-corporate, anti-war truth teller. So conclude from that what you will. But non-Tucker items that we want to cover before we start the main event tonight. So a few things. So first, we're not going to do a clip of this because we've been burned too many times before with HBO. You know, they are extremely, you know, the HBO legal department or whatever is extremely on top of their content being used. But our actual friend of show and actual friend in real life, Danny Bessner, who's been on the show here on YouTube many times, who's at the Give Them a Revolution live show we did with TIR and Left Reckoning in LA, was on Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday. So if you know, do have HBO Max, or you go on YouTube and check it out, it's an interesting discussion. You know, veteran Bessner watchers will note that it's particularly interesting that he to see him not wearing like shorts and a hoodie, but all cleaned up and, you know, college professor going out talk show mode. Anyway, I thought he did great. He directed every topic towards sort of core Jacobin issues about the distribution of material resources in a way that I really like. He said the word capitalism about 200 times. I thought he ended really strong at the end of the panel by talking about the adjunctification of higher education and how that's the sort of real thing underlying a lot of the college stuff that Bill's kind of become obsessed with. That, you know, if you know, the sort of neoliberal university that people pay an arm and a leg for, of course, people start to view that as a consumer experience, and everything else kind of reflects that. And if you watch the overtime they do on CNN after the main show, you can see they start talking about SpaceX, and Danny says, you know, hey, I don't understand if we do just, you know, if we've decided for whatever reason as a society that we want to go to space, why rely on the private sector? And, you know, I think actually the greatest technological innovations we ever had in this country were in the periods of greatest central planning, which is kind of funny to think about because next week's guest on Real Time is going to be Elon Musk. So, you know, that's you know, Bill Maher whiplash there, Daddy Best Nerd Elon. But do check that out. The part that the article in the Daily Beast that came out today, Bill Maher is clueless about Chicago guns and poverty, I think is the title that they put on it, is about the first segment where they're talking about crime and violence, and particularly they're talking about Chicago, and Bill and the other guest, who's this conservative-ish economist, Glenn Lowry, really want to make the issue about violent crime in Chicago about individual morality, and they're upset that Brandon Johnson, who's the Chicago Teachers Union activist, Bernie Crack kind of guy who was just elected to mayor, isn't showing enough moral leadership by, going on TV and talking about how bad crime is. Danny is trying to make the point that if you actually want to attack this at a policy level, you need to redistribute resources, and both Bill and Glenn really dismiss that as throwing money at the problem won't solve it. I suggest that all real world evidence suggests that throwing money at the problem is the only thing that could solve it. There's actually, there are studies showing even modest increases in the minimum wage and earned income tax credit reduce criminal recidivism, access to healthcare reduces the crime rate, which is not shocking because there's if you think about the role of mental illness and drug abuse, in many crimes, and there's the point we always like to make about how there are places like Sweden and Norway that manage to have a teensy tiny fraction of our murder rate, as well as having a vastly more humane and rehabilitation focused criminal justice system. And if you think that that's just because their cultures are innately more peaceful, see the entire history of their cultures before, in the greater historical scheme of things about 15 minutes ago.
And what do they suggest then? I'll rely on you because we can't show it for litigious reasons. What do they suggest is the answer to change the culture of Chicago?
More or less, yeah. There's a point where Bill Maher suggests that because he says most murders in Chicago are young black men killing other young black men, so black celebrities need to speak out about it more, which I suggest in the article makes it sound like Bill thinks somewhere in Chicago there's a gang member who would stop committing violence if only he knew that Chris Rock disapproved of violence. But since he doesn't know that, he's just going to keep killing people.
Yeah, not like there's any history of black celebrities denouncing violence for years and years and years. I mean, I think it's which is nice, but I think it's not like it hasn't been tried.
And like a lot of it's about and then like there seemed to be a suggestion that we're not cracking down hard enough, and like I would just point out like whatever story you want to tell about Chicago or anything about the last few years, the United States has had, by global standards, a very high rate of violent crime forever. And we also have one of the highest incarceration rates in the history of any country that's ever existed. So I think that the just crack down harder approach is probably not going to do it. And the have random rich people who look like people in high crime neighborhoods or say how bad it is approach is not going to work out.
You don't remember when like Alexander Skarsgård and all of those Nordic people went on that? I don't think he's even from the Nordic countries, but when they did that PSA and then the murder rate just shot down when Bjork was. It was a
Bjork talked about how much it hurt her to see people committing violance.
Yeah, we got to.
ABBA came on. It was something.
Real quick, I would just want to say I'd like to think the person that whoever writes that little subhead firing blanks, I'd like to think that's their only job and that they're just like a genius at those, because that sounds like a fun job to think of with the pun based on the on the headline.
Nice. I would definitely hope so. Okay, a couple of things before we bring on Victor and Ethan. So one of them is that Bernie Sanders has recently renewed his call to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to reduce the work week from 40 hours to 32. which I wrote about for Jacobin. And there's, I will, um, I will say it is remarkable as I was writing this, looking at what the arguments were of the opposition, because you can look at last month, there was sort of more or less symbolic attempt to introduce this in Congress. The committee chairwoman is Virginia Fox, is a Republican who's very adamantly opposed to it. And so, of course, it's not going to make it out of committee. And there was an attempt last year to introduce a fairly detailed, worked out law to do this. It was going to be for companies with 500 or more employees in the California State Assembly that, similarly was not allowed to get a floor vote. Can't blame the Republicans for that one. But if you look at like what Virginia Fox has said about this, and you look at what Reason Magazine, I kind of knew that they would step up to the plate. As when I started researching this, it's like, I'll bet somewhere on Reason's archives there's an article about why we shouldn't reduce the work week, and I was not disappointed. There was, and I want to get through this because there's like one more big segment we want to do, and then we're gonna bring on our panel for today. But the thing that I find really remarkable about this is that none of these people who are opposed to this are going to quite come out and say, we think it's great that people are working all the time. We would never want there to be a world where people had reduced working hours. Keep working till you die. Instead, the tack is to say, well, look, if advancing technology just kind of organically leads to work weeks reducing, then that's great. But we shouldn't have this like top-down, government mandate. And, the main thing I was suggesting in the article is that labor productivity. Bernie said in the tweet 1940, he was actually off. His 1938 is the Fair Labor Standards Act was put out, reducing the work week to 40 hours. Since 1940, there have been insane increases in labor productivity. I saw one thing that said just from 1950 to 2020, it went up 299%. If advancing technology was going to do this by itself, it would have happened a long, long time ago. It turns out that if technology advances and makes something possible, but also it wouldn't be profitable for the people who own the means of production, it's probably not going to just magically happen on its own without anybody making it happen.
Yeah, it sounds like you need some class struggle as opposed to just like one day we can ask ChatGPT what is the optimal work week, and they'll say one day, the AI will say 38 hours a week, and then we could shave off a couple hours. It's particularly on this issue is a pretty ridiculous technocratic fantasy that it will just somehow magically happen. So good job calling that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, George Jetson didn't have that nice work week if it wasn't for a space Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's kind of amazing that like all he did was push that one button, but he still seemed to be required to hang around after he did it, for a really long time.
Talk about bullshit jobs. Jetson.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Spacely wasn't going to let him just go home after he pushed it. Okay. So last thing I want to do before I bring on Victor and Ethan, we're running a few minutes behind, but is to talk about something that I wrote about last week, which is the Pentagon leaks. So as people may recall, last week's episode, we talked about this article I'd written for the Daily Beast about the leaks. And I took, the position you'd expect me to take, but apparently a lot of Daily Beast readers were not expected to read, which is that leaks are good. We should know what our government's foreign policy is. And yes, more leaks, please. This, as you may recall from last week, it's kept coming since then, but we had a little sample of the initial reaction. If we want to play that clip, a little montage here, several of the reactions. Why are you printing this shit? Pathetic. What the fuck kind of opinion is this? Typical birdie crap bullshit. Fuck off and keep fucking off until you get to a gate with the sign saying you can fuck off past here, climb over the gate, dream the impossible dream, and keep fucking off forever. That's insane. Okay, this one just says scum. So that I will say this guy's the most succinct out of all the reader comments that we've seen so far. Points for that.
Yes. Clarity is important.
Yeah, I think if you could do it in one syllable, you don't need to say all this. Next guy's not nearly so succinct. Yeah. And it kind of went on and on and on like that. But I was invited to come talk about it on Rising, on the Hill, which I don't know if it's always them or if it's rotating, but I think it's hosted or sometimes hosted anyway, however it might work, by Briahna Joy Gray and Robbie Suave. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And as you know, they like to do the sort of voice for the right and voice for the left thing as the co-hosts of that show. So people remember it used to be Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty before they went off and started their own show. And then it was Ryan Grimm and Emily, I'm not going to try, Eastern European sounding last name that I don't quite remember how to string together. And then they went off, they went off to do their own thing too. And now it's Briahna and Robbie. But anyway, I went on to talk about this, and it was good. It was a good interview. I think it was a fair interview. I think there was a little bit of disagreement. Nobody called anybody, America hating scum or anything. But I want to just play that, spend like a minute kind of talking about the one disagreement that did kind of come up, and then we're going to go to Victor and Ethan.
While authorities and mainstream media alike have been quick to demonize the Pentagon leaker, 21-year-old National Air Guardsman Jack Teixeira, our next guest says we should see him as a public service hero. Writer Ben Burgess contends the central question around the leaked documents is not how Airman Teixeira had access, but why were these secrets kept from the public in the first place?
On revelations around the Ukraine war, Burgess writes, quote, "It's also important information from the perspective of Americans who should get a say in how deeply our own country should be involved in that war." Ben Burgess, a columnist at Jacobin and host of Give Them an Argument, joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And you're making an argument that I myself have made on this show. The overclassification of supposedly sensitive documents is such an issue. It's a lack of transparency. It's the government shielding from people things we ought to know. Looking at these documents and give me your impression, it actually doesn't seem like a lot of the truly defensively sensitive material, the locations of troop movements, the identities of spies who might be embedded in foreign countries, but rather just intelligence about the general situation Ukraine is in, which is something the American people ought to know as we make our decisions about whether to continue supporting what our government is doing with respect to military support.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of what emerged from this is extremely relevant to these public policy questions about how much or how long the United States should continue its present course of amping up military support to Ukraine and not making any effort at de-escalation or peace negotiations. Certainly, for example, the information that Ukrainian President Zelensky wants to use longer-range missiles for strikes within Russia is pretty important to the debate about whether such missiles should be sent to Ukraine, or in general how much current support should be amped up. And I think probably the most disturbing thing in these documents is the revelation, and there were previous reports of it, but certainly nothing that was admitted, that there are NATO boots on the ground, including American boots on the ground. Not very many of them, but there are a few on the ground in Ukraine, which is something that President Biden specifically promised last year in an op-ed in the New York Times that he would not do. And to my mind, the real question here is, should the rest of us have a say on that? In other words, this is, whether or not to send the special forces personnel to Ukraine, that seems like a really important foreign policy question. And it's one that shouldn't be made in secret from the American public.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're focusing in here and also in your article about the substance of the leaked documents that, to your point, have gone largely undercovered by mainstream media sources who have instead focused on the provenance of the documents and how this Air Guard figure was able to access them and put them on Discord without them being caught. That being said, it seems to me that a lot of the pushback here is about the hypocrisy that the mainstream media is more interested in the leaker than the substance of the documents. And the argument goes, this is they're carrying water for the state. They are refusing to report on material information here. They've been very hypocritical about leakers in the past. But is it possible to both have a journalistic interest in the provenance of the documents and simultaneously report on the substance of the documents? Or do you agree with Glenn Greenwald, who has argued that there's something inappropriate about the choice of mainstream media reporters to really hunt down and reveal the identity of the source?
Yeah, I do agree with Glenn on that one. I think that it's disturbing to focus on trying to find out who leaked these documents. I mean, that it's one thing to say that as information comes up, you're going to report it. You're not going to hold it back, because it's newsworthy. But to the extent that some mainstream media sources, Washington Post, New York Times, seem to be really on a mission to find out who this was, to essentially help the national, the security state, the Pentagon, to track down and arrest this person for the crime of exposing this information, perhaps inadvertently, right? If that wasn't his goal. I don't care very much about his goals, but what he was being hunted down for was exposing this information to the American public. And I think that the media should want that information to be exposed to the American public. And certainly, like to the extent that some of what's gone on stepped over the line from just being like, well, here's what we know so far about the search for this guy, to let's actively try to figure out who this was, then yes, that does disturb me. I think that's very different from the attitude that I would hope that an independent media would have towards leakers.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if it reflects a kind of ideology of the mainstream media that is really even clearer in this conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, than past conflicts, where there's not a lot of, despite these publications being progressive in a lot of ways on social issues and other things, they're the kind of capture of the Democratic Party by national security officials. They're the more, at the present time, kind of the mainstream Democratic Party and mainstream media are the more, in some kind of weird twist, the more hawkish of the factions, even though there's, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of hawkishness in Republican circles as well, but they're almost even more bought into this conflict on the idea that we need to fund it perpetually than I think the media might have been before, which means that, what this leaker is doing is almost substantively bad, in addition to like the journalism questions of whether they should, pursue leads and that kind of thing from their perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, the part that I would very slightly push back on is just the comparative question I do think that, at least in a sort of broad sense, if you look at their views, not just on Russia and Ukraine, but other areas, especially China, I think even a lot of very sort of mega populisty Republicans are actually sort of super hawkish on that. It's almost like the old Obama thing about how the war in Iraq was bad because it's distracting us from Afghanistan. Sometimes, what people are really saying is, the war in Ukraine is bad because it distracts us from the confrontation with China. But putting that aside, I mean, I agree with the rest of that. I think that the Democratic Party certainly is very, invested in American empire. I don't think that's a particularly, new development. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the way that most Democrats acted about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars when they started, and the Patriot Act and all of that. But it is a real phenomenon, and certainly a lot of news organizations share that worldview. That they, again, the concern, and this is what really bothers me when I look at the story, that the concern is not, wow, this is amazing information that has been kept from our readers, and it would be obviously relevant if you accept the basic premise that in a democracy, the public in general should get to know what the country's foreign policy is in detail. I'm not talking about troop movements, but I am talking about things like whether to send special forces personnel to Ukraine in the first place, questions like what the likely consequences would be of escalating American military aid, begging to pass down where it is. These are questions of vital public importance that citizens of a democracy should get to weigh in on. And rather than seeing their role as to help spread this information to their readers, viewers, listeners, I am disturbed by how many media outlets seem to think that the most important thing for them to do is to press the Pentagon on what they see as the scandal of how a 24-year-old National Guard airman could have gotten access to this information in the first place.
Yeah, I guess it just doesn't seem to me that one of those follows from the other. Like, of course, it is annoying. It is inappropriate. It is a dereliction of their journalistic responsibility to focus on the provenance of the documents to the exclusion of the substance of the documents. But I do think that there is a credible argument about this person not actually being a leaker. He hasn't described himself as a leaker. We'll find out more about his motives, I'm sure, in the future. But he is not someone who would be incentivized to continue to leak information to journalists by protecting his identity, right? The rationale of protecting your sources is to facilitate them being able to share material public information so that it can be reported on for the public interest, which of course is deeply important. It's not clear to me how that plays into a figure like Airman Teixeira, given that his motivation, as we know it, to share this information was not for the public interest, not to share with journalists, et cetera, but to impress people in his Discord group. And that being the case, what value, is there an obligation actually for journalists to continue to protect his identity? Not that they should vindictively try to expose him because he didn't share the information with him, but is it correct to refer to him as a leaker? And is it correct for him to then expect the same kind of expectations in terms of protection from the from journalists rather, given the way he has chosen to behave? Do we want to incentivize this behavior, leaking to Discord, or do we want to incentivize leaking to journalists? I'll give you a chance to respond.
Yeah. So obviously it would have been better if he'd leaked directly to journalists. I understand the argument that he doesn't count as a leaker. I will say I don't have that much interest in that argument. I think that the sort of key question is whether we have a right to know this information and what role the media plays in that process. And rather than kind of the moral virtue of this guy. Now, I understand your argument that the standard reasons for protecting leakers don't apply to him because it may be true that he only did this inadvertently. This wasn't really his motive. But I guess where I would get off board with that argument is that my concern would be not just incentivizing him personally to continue to leak more information, but incentivizing, or at least not providing a massive disincentive to the next person and the person after that and the person after that to leak important information. Because I think if I were in this guy's position, and even if I had better motivations than him, I would see what was happening to him. I would see the Washington Post saying that it was a despicable dereliction of duty what he said. I would say organizations like the Post and the Times collaborating with Bellingcat apparently to help track him down, and none of that would make me confident that they were going to have a different attitude towards me, even if I did this in a different way. In other words, if I was confident that Robbie was wrong and this doesn't reflect a sort of ideological conviction on the part of media, I might understand that argument a little bit better. I might be able to say, okay, maybe everybody would know that their attitude would be different, for somebody who acted more like a standard leaker. In this case, I'm much less confident that that's true.
And of course, there's a middle ground. It would be better, I think, if he leaked to journalists, but a trusted journalist, not necessarily someone who manufactures the same mainstream consensus.
That's the incentive that will be set up. Arguably, he could be looking at this and saying, "Oh, next time I should leak to a journalist."
Well, more. Thank you, Ben
Burgis. I hope so.
Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I guess 2 quick points about this before we wrap it up. One of them is I was talking to Bronco Marchesich about this later, and I think he made a good point, which is that leaker is actually a totally neutral term. It's just somebody who leaks information. There's the maybe you don't want to call him a whistleblower because that's something that suggests a certain motive, but that you're still a leaker regardless of why you leaked it. But that's a semantic point. That doesn't really matter. And my whole thing is that I think sort of obsessing about, honestly, my one regret about the Daily Beast, articles, they put the word hero in the headline. I don't think it appears in the article because I don't care about that, right? I don't care whether he's a good guy or a bad guy or, what his level of personal virtue is. I care about whether the public has a right to know this information, and I care about whether the media should be helping the government drag him down. And I'm yes on 1, and therefore no on 2. And I guess where Briahna's argument there doesn't make sense to me is that the idea that this creates an incentive to leak to journalists, I just don't see it. I think that I don't see anything about the sort of zeal of the mainstream press to expose this guy that even vaguely hints that of course we'd be going to jail to defend him if he'd leaked it to us. Right. I can't imagine anybody in that position concluding that. It's, when the Washington Post editorializes and called a disgusting dereliction of duty that he leaked this stuff to the Discord server. And in fact, the Washington Post seems to be interested in helping to expose who it is. I mean, not only did they not say, but of course we would be dying, throwing our lives down to defend him had he leaked it directly to us and not to a Discord server. Not only do they not say that, I just don't see any world in which anybody inside the military who might otherwise be considering leaking would somehow read between the lines that, that was the incentive they were creating.
I mean, there's no difference between what's going on right now with this leaker and Edward Snowden. If you remember back then, I actually was watching Melissa Harris Perry, and she's sitting there she did this segment on like how egocentric Edward Snowden was, and I literally just turned off my TV. Well, actually, no. First, I deleted it from my my TiVo. And like all her future episodes, and I'm like, no, I read her book and I liked her book, so that's why I watched her show, and like she said that, and I'm like, nope, this isn't right. We're not a pair. We can't see each other anymore. I'm gonna have to delete you from my TiVo. Yeah, and I don't see any difference between then where he actually did leak to a journalist, to now.
Yeah. And also whatever. I mean, if somebody let's say he'd done neither what he did nor leaked to a journalist, but he just put it all up as a Medium post, right? So there's no journalist involved unless you want to say by virtue of posting on Medium, he's a journalist, which is, I guess cutting the argument very thin, but like, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think that if you want to have this stuff to be able to report on, you don't want to give people the impression that you're going to be on the side of the people trying to track them down if they expose it, and I think try to make this very fine distinction, about different ways of exposing it, or how, I mean, nobody, I really don't see anybody who didn't go to law school concluded it's like, oh, they only did this because we didn't leak it to them. And frankly, even a lot of people who did, I think, would reasonably suspect that nothing about the attitude that was displayed by the press when this happened gives them confidence that they would protect leakers even then. All right, so want to say the last thing we didn't talk about is the Substack for this week. Self-evident. It's called Of Course You Can Prove a Negative. Could go read that at benburgis.substack.com. Had a little bit of fun with this one, since this is something that's been driving me crazy for as long as I've seen people argue about things on the internet. People make this claim that you can't prove a negative, so I thought that would be good for the philosophy Substack. But speaking of philosophy, it's time to bring on our guest for tonight and address the greatest philosopher now alive, Dinesh D'Souza, and some of his contributions. So I will see Jake and Andy in the post game. As welcome Victor and Ethan.
Thank you for having me.
You know what that sound is? All right, I believe that is Victor.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, while Victor is figuring out his beeping,
Victor has decided to communicate with us in Morse code, apparently.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's the pilot of Star Trek, the original series. There's the guy who's in like the futuristic wheelchair, and he hit with the Morse code beeps. Or it's not even Morse code beeps. It's it's like once for yes and twice for no or something, which is funny because it always made me wonder if Morse code lost art in the future. But in any case, Ethan has a YouTube channel called Confronting Capital. People should check that out. We have a link in the description. Victor, when he resolves his beeping and joins us, we'll introduce him properly then. But yeah, this is something. This is something that I had no idea about. Our graphic designer Andy brought this to my attention over the weekend. That D'Souza has all of these videos on Rumble where he talks about philosophy. So one of them that let's start with this one. There's one of them is about David Hume and miracles. There's one on John Rawls and abortion rights. There's something about like big tech moguls that has something rather to do with Nietzsche. I'm not sure I'm quite following, but there's this seemed like material we had to address in the show, and you guys seemed like good people to do it with. So yeah, Jake, if we could get the let's find out. Let's see if this works.
All right.
Hey.
No?
You're working.
It's beep free Victor. Outstanding. So before we get to this video about David Hume, that's miracles. Victor is a co-host of Plastic Pills. Is there anything else you want to mention, Victor?
So is my audio working? Sorry, I think I had the setting wrong there.
Yes,
okay.
is.
Amazing.
You had
Yeah,
it
no,
set
that's
to beep.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on. That was, I mean, the settings were right. I just had to log out and log back in. I don't know what the deal was. Yeah, I mean, co-host of Plastic Pills, and I don't know if Ethan already mentioned it, but we're like gonna soon launch another podcast, which I think is going to be titled Academic Edgelords. We've already recorded a few episodes, and we're looking at, I guess you could call them controversial or contentious arguments in academia. Kind of the policy, the main policy is like they have to be peer reviewed. So I don't know, just to give a flavor, we've recorded an episode on like, you know, Jason Brennan's Against Democracy. We recorded an episode from like criminologist Peter Moskos, who has a provocatively named book called In Defense of Flogging, although it's not quite as extreme as it sounds. So those are the kinds of topics, you know, and I think didn't Peter Singer also came out with that journal that we'll probably draw from, right? I think it's called the Journal of Controversial Ideas. Maybe we'll take a look at that, but that's sort of the basic idea.
Yeah.
So watch out for that.
Singer himself somewhat regularly.
Yes.
I think you can probably feature this.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. And also anything by Stephen Kirshner, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Stephen Kirshner's entire career has been lived in anticipation of podcast and the desire to make sure you have material.
I feel like he's like the platonic ideal of the academic edgelord. I feel like he is like the perfect instantiation of that.
Nice. Yeah, so Dinesh D'Souza, I should say, is somebody who, you know, I think that when he first came on my radar a million years ago, he'd written a book called The End of Racism that was a very sort of 90s right-wing culture war kind of book. He had Dartmouth, I want to say, is where he went to college, wherever he went to. Yeah, okay. So and he founded this sort of famous right-wing student publication, the Dartmouth Review, and then as far, you know, so I kind of vaguely knew that it was actually very edgelordy, kind of right-wing student publication to tie together those topics, and in you know, when he next came on my radar was when he was like doing things. I think he might have already been in prison at this point. He was like a dean of some college, but then he'd managed to like violate campaign finance law in some crazy enough way that he actually like briefly, I don't know if he was in a prison or just a halfway house, but he was in some prison-like thing for a minute. And then he came out and, you know, by the way, like, you know, campaign finance law enforcement is such that you really have to try to like actually end up facing serious consequences for that. But then he got out and he started writing these books about how people think Republicans are racist, but Democrats are the real racists because I don't know, you know, did you know that the Confederates were Democrats, and you know, you know, kind of arguments on that level, and I will say later on when I was writing the Hitchens book, I did watch this old debate that he done in the late 2000s with Christopher Hitchens that kind of shocked me, because I don't know that he said anything too brilliant exactly, but like he did seem enough brighter than what you would think from watching his actually the Democrats are the real fascists stuff, or his like or his election fraud stuff, that it was like, okay, I don't know if he actually used to be much better, or you know, or if like he actually is smarter than you'd think and this is just a character he plays on TV, or what the deal is. And maybe what we're about to watch will shed some light on that, but that's kind of my sense of Dinesh D'Souza, if you guys have anything.
I mean, I only know of him through the kind of like propagandistic documentaries that he makes. I've never actually like decided to force myself to sit down and watch one of these things. I don't know if either of you have, but I just like, I think I've seen clips here and there, and I was sort of thinking when you were talking to if there's some equivalent, if you think there's like a D'Souza equivalent on the left who just makes like clearly, like the impression I get is these documentaries are things that if you take like 5 minutes to look up a few of the facts on Google, like you'll easily like find issues with the way he's framing these documentaries. But like, I don't know, is there like someone else like that? I mean, the only person I could kind of think of who maybe does or has made kind of sensationalist left-wing documentaries be like, I guess Michael Moore, but it's like way better, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael Moore, there are things you can nail him on in those documentaries where he's presenting things in misleading ways that sort of fit with his narrative at that moment, or just kind of for the sake of the punchline or whatever.
Well, I always loved in Bowling for Columbine, as like a Canadian who lives in Canada, how he just like goes to one town and he's just like, look at this, everyone has their door unlocked in Canada because there's no guns. And I was just like, I mean, that's like not really true, but okay, you went to like one small town in Ontario and you're like, Canadians never lock their doors.
Yeah, right. Like there are no towns in Wisconsin, you could have done that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember Bowling for Columbine. He has this like cartoon sequence about, like the history of like race and guns in America. That's like, honestly is like pretty ludicrously, at best cherry picked, right? Like I think he's, ignoring a lot of times where the like racial or political valence of like the gun control discussion is the opposite of what of what he's portrayed, that the in sort of attempts, like, I mean, obvious examples of stuff that he leaves out are like, the Black Panther Party and the Ronald Reagan is the governor of California supporting gun control against them, and et cetera, right? Because he wants to tell this very straightforward story where it's like always been white racists who've wanted there to be more guns, and I think it's at best very oversimplified. So yeah, look, Michael Moore is not a flawless source. Certainly, I don't think that Michael Moore at his worst is quite phoning in from a completely alternate dimension.
Totally.
Like Dinesh D'Souza.
I mean, Dinesh D'Souza's got to be like a grifter, right? Like he must know that the stuff he's doing is absurd, and maybe just like has some kind of Machiavellian calculation that like if it can move people towards his stance, it's like a noble lie of some kind. I don't know.
Possible.
I think he's kind of like, because I remember watching that debate he did with Christopher Hitchens like many years ago. I think that was the first time I ever heard of Dinesh D'Souza. And yeah, I mean, my impression from that debate is that he seems like a bit too smart to be saying like, and that's not saying much, right, given many of his claims, but like he seems too smart to be making some of the claims that he makes, which makes me think that some of it probably is like intentional pandering. Maybe not necessarily like super Machiavellian, but probably at least like he's knowingly saying stuff that he kind of probably internally eye rolls at a little bit, because I think he knows it'll help him like sell documentaries or books or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how this fellow fits into it, but people in the chat are saying he also banged Laura Ingraham, so let's, take that.
It fits in somehow.
All right. Let's start his thoughts about David Hume and miracles.
I want to talk about miracles. Have you ever seen or witnessed a miracle? I haven't, but I know many people who have. They believe firmly that they have experienced a miracle in their lives, or they have been present and seen a healing, some kind of event that they would describe honestly as miraculous. There is no way this otherwise could have happened. They don't just mean it was an unlikely event, they mean it was a supernatural event. Now, the question I want to explore is whether miracles are invalidated, are made impossible by the fact that we live in a world that is determined, and I'm using that term also in its philosophical sense, determined by physical, scientific laws. Now, the most famous argument against miracles was given by the philosopher David Hume, and I'll come to that in a minute, because Hume is kind of the guru of today's kind of new atheist, the atheist camp, represented by people like Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. Here's Richard Dawkins talking about miracles.
Jay, could we pause
And
this for a
Richard
second?
Dawkins is responding to biologist Stephen Jay Gould.
All right. I just want to say really briefly that the new atheist would have been so much better if David Hume actually had been their guru.
True.
All right. I just, yeah, I think some, if I'd ever gotten the sense that like Sam Harris had read the, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, that's, I think he would have been doing better. But all right, let's keep going.
By the way, Stephen Jay Gould had tried to make a sort of rapprochement, a healing between the scientific and the religious communities by saying, listen, the scientific and the religious communities are doing two different things. The scientific community pursues facts, and the religious community pursues values. And since facts and values belong to sort of two conceptually different camps, you can allow each group to kind of do its own thing. There's no reason they should be clashing or fighting with each other. This is the theme of Stephen Jay Gould's book called Rocks of Ages. Now, Dawkins, I think, very slyly notices that this doesn't really work. And Dawkins says, well, what about miracles? He goes, miracles are actually a claim, not just about values. You should be honest and truthful. Miracles are claims that some event occurred. This dead guy came back to life. This person with cancer was miraculously cured. And so, says Dawkins, there is now an overlap because somebody is claiming that this was done miraculously or supernaturally. And science, he says, shows that that cannot happen. Why? Because, says Dawkins, quote, science is based upon verifiable evidence. And miracles, according to him, are violations of the incorrigible, unalterable laws of science. Now, let's turn from Dawkins to someone who makes this argument in a more formal and sophisticated way, and that is the philosopher David Hume. I'm now going to sort of outline Hume's argument, and then I'm going to outline my refutation of it. Here's Hume's argument in 4 parts. Number 1, a miracle is a violation of the known laws of nature. Number 2, we know these laws through repeated and constant experience. Number 3, the testimony of those who report a miracle or claim to have seen a miracle contradicts the operation of known scientific laws. Therefore, number 4, no one can rationally believe in miracles. Basically, what Hume is saying is that someone says there's a miracle, even if they're a believable guy, not, habitually given to lying, you have to weigh the credibility of their testimony against the fact that we have literally millions upon millions of experiences that say the opposite. So a guy goes, I miraculously saw a guy with 3 eyes. You go, wait a minute. We've seen millions and millions of people all over the world, and everybody has 2 eyes. So are we going to believe this guy who says that he saw a man with 3 eyes? Or are we going to believe the accumulated weight of human experience as consolidated in the form of scientific laws that say that Homo sapiens, human beings, are born with 2 eyes? So this appears to be a kind of devastating argument against miracles, so devastating that many Christians have sort of cowered from it and run for cover. Here's the theologian Rudolf Bultmann now writing about a generation ago in the early 1960s. Bultmann goes, well, it is impossible to use electric lights and the wireless and to avail ourselves of modern medical and surgical discoveries and at the same time to believe in the New Testament world of spirits and miracles. So Bultmann is willing to give them up and basically say, well, maybe we should subtract miracles from Christianity. But I think we all know that you can't do that. Why? Because Christianity, of all religions, is actually dependent on miracles. It's the religion that relies the most on miracles, even more than Judaism. By the way, there are miracles in the Old Testament, but if you remove the miracles, the Old Testament would largely remain the same. The Jewish religion, Jewish faith, is not critically dependent on miracles, but Christianity is. Why? Because Christianity rises or falls on the resurrection, a miracle, a supernatural event. A man who was put to death by the Romans rose again. And of course, Jesus, as we know, performed a whole bunch of miracles. He brought the sick to life, and he made people who were lame walk, and he cured leprosy, and he did all this stuff. Even Islam, compared to Christianity, hardly depends on miracles. I believe in the Quran at some place Muhammad is associated with a single miracle, but just one. Again, if you remove the miracle, Islam remains largely the same. So let's now come back to David Hume's argument, because it seems so unassailable, and I want to just outline my refutation of it, which I will develop in the next segment. Here's my refutation. A miracle is a violation of the known laws of nature. This, my first point, repeats David Hume's first point. The second point, scientific laws are, on Hume's own account, empirically unverifiable. What I'm saying here is critical. What I'm saying is that Hume forgot to read his own book. Hume's argument against miracles, by the way, is contained in a book called An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. But in another book by Hume called A Treatise on Human Nature, Hume himself explains why no scientific law is empirically verifiable, and claims that, in fact, science has laws are themselves absurd. Now, it's important to distinguish here between two types of laws. I would call them mathematical laws on the one hand and empirical laws on the other. No one denies that mathematical laws operate by necessity. So 2 + 2 = 4. That will always be true. That is true by necessity. Pythagoras' theorem, that if you add the square in a right triangle, if you add the squares of the two sides, it equals the square of the long side. That's the Pythagorean theorem. It's always true. It's true by necessity. But let's take a different kind of empirical law. Light travels at a known speed, or E = mc², or Newton's square law. I'm going to show in the next segment that those laws, empirical laws, are not empirically verifiable. So here we go. Scientific laws are, on Hume's own account, empirically unverifiable. Thus, violations of the known laws of nature are possible. If these laws are unverifiable, obviously there could be exceptions to those laws, and therefore miracles are possible. The bottom line of it is there are some people who think that miracles are like old-fashioned. This is, people in the old days used to believe all kinds of stupid stuff. But as C.S. Lewis himself points out in a book called Miracles, Lewis says, hey, listen, don't think that ancient people were all that stupid. Ancient people knew that dead people don't come back to life. Ancient people knew how babies were made. They didn't think that, for example, you could be born of a virgin. So when these things happen in the ancient world, don't think the ancient people go, well, it could be the case. No, they knew that this was a scandalous departure from the normal patterns of nature. A miracle is a very irregular event. Even believers affirm that there is a pattern in nature, but there can be exceptions to it if God wills that there should be. That's the definition of a miracle, and as I'm about to show, such miracles are in no way inconsistent with any known laws of nature.
Okay. So, a lot going on there. First thought, does he have the argument right?
I mean, it was kind of it seemed like he misconstrued Hume a few times. I mean, I don't think the argument was exactly right. And also, I don't think his account of like Hume's view of laws of nature was exactly right either. I mean, he kind of appealed to like, this interpretation of Hume being like a regularity theorist about laws of nature or whatever, where like laws of nature are just like these highly, empirically confirmed regularities, but that there's no like, metaphysically robust underlying like principle that like makes this regularity or that like underpins the regularity. I mean, it's just kind of strange because like, I don't know, like even if you do take that view, like that was Hume's position on laws of nature, which is like very controversial in terms of like the exegetical debate about like what Hume thought. But like, even if you do think that, it's like he says, okay, according to Hume's own view, laws of nature are just regularities. There's not an underlying necessary principle there. So therefore, it's possible to break the laws of nature. But like, Hume doesn't necessarily have to hold that it's impossible to break the laws of nature, as long as breaking the laws of nature is possible, but that the laws of nature are still these like highly empirically confirmed regularities. It would still seem like you would need need to meet a pretty high burden of proof in order to show that the regularity actually doesn't always hold. And I think that's sort of sufficient for like Hume's argument against miracles to work. Like, I think he's setting the bar too high. Like, Hume has to prove that miracles are impossible. Like, no, he just has to claim that they're very unlikely. So our priors and like any given miracle claim being true should be really, really low.
Yeah, absolutely. That I mean, something where I used to talk about this in the when I was living in New Jersey and teaching at Rutgers in person. I did the philosophy of religion class there and talk about this, and I remember, saying like, look, you can run a version of this argument for cases that aren't even technically miraculous, and because Hume's point, which I think Dinesh kind of said, it got a little bit mangled. I think somebody could definitely come out of that video not quite getting this. But like Hume's point is like, what you have to do is you have to compare how unlikely it would be that the speaker is saying something false with how unlikely it would be that somebody walked on water, for example, right? That kind of miracle. And even if the speaker is super duper trustworthy, it doesn't follow, like a super duper trustworthy person who doesn't seem to be crazy at all, and you've never known him to lie and all this stuff. A super duper trustworthy person suddenly lied or being deluded or whatever, like any of the scenarios whereby he says something false might be very unlikely, but it's not anything like as unlikely as somebody walking on water, right? So, and you could do that for completely non-miraculous cases. So the version I would give that is I would say, look, let's say, I don't know if this is true. I hope this is true. That you guys think I'm a really trustworthy guy. I wouldn't lie to you. You don't think I'm crazy, all that stuff. Nevertheless, if I came into class at the beginning of class and said, hey, last night, Vladimir Putin and former President Bill Clinton and the Pope all flew to New Jersey, and they had dinner with me at my apartment. Look, that's not even a violation of the laws of nature. That's just, that's just a completely physically and metaphysically possible, but just super duper unlikely event. And no matter how trustworthy you think I am, you probably still think that me lied, being deluded, played a practical joke that would seem super out of character for me, whatever, like, would be way less unlikely than that thing happening. Never mind the laws of nature case, because you say, like, again, you don't need metaphysical impossibility. You can just say, like, given that, we have all of this evidence that every time somebody steps onto the surface of water, they sink, your starting line probability estimate for any particular example of somebody stepping onto the surface of a lake and sinking should be, if it's not 100, it should certainly be 99.9999999, and that whatever that leaves is much less likely than several people who are otherwise credible saying something false. That would be Hume's point, as I've always understood it.
Yeah, I also just found it puzzling that his example of a miracle was like a person with 3 eyes. I was like, that's kind of like a weird.
I'm not aware of like even physical possibility. Like, what law of nature does that break?
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
Yeah,
I would just be like, what happened to this person? Let's do some investigations. And like, how this person got a 3rd eye? It doesn't seem. I don't know. Oh, but yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, the argument also just kind of seemed like one of those weird, I don't know if it's called arguments from ignorance or something. It's like, because it seemed like he was saying, because like if we accept his account of Hume's argument, it's just saying, well, it seems like Hume can't exclude miracles, but then he like jumps. So then he says, so that means miracles are possible. But like that leap is not justified, right? Like just because you don't know something doesn't mean it's grounds for something being possible. It just means you can't exclude it, right? So it's like, and I think sometimes people make this sort of move, like kind of arguing from ignorance. It's like, well, if we can't exclude it, then maybe. And it's like, well, it doesn't actually tell you anything at all. It just means you can't exclude something, but that doesn't give you any reasons to think that it's possible at all. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also a little bit weird that there's the inconsistency claim about what Hume thought, and then there's we should reject this argument that he made. And those just seem like completely different things.
Yeah. No, it's like, like his argument was like, okay, conditional on Hume's view of laws of nature being right, this argument doesn't go through. It's like, it's not clear that that response is going to work against like the majority of people who don't accept Hume's view on laws of nature, like even assuming that was Hume's view. Like that's a very controversial position, to be like this, complete Humean regularity theorist about laws of nature.
Yeah. How about the rest of us who think it is impossible to violate laws of nature, or that that's what we have evidence of, that if you have evidence that the special theory of relativity is true, then then that is evidence that it's impossible for anything to in some deep sense of impossibility for anything to accelerate faster than the speed of light. If that's your position, then okay. I mean, like, it seems like Dinesh's defense isn't going to hold any water. And even if it's not, I mean, who cares? I mean, it's like, I think Ethan's first point is still the most salient one, because it's like, even if you do accept, like, and again, I mean, anybody could, arguments aren't like attached to people, that, that it's not like you can't, David Hume is the guy who made this argument, so you can only make this argument if you agree with all of David Hume's other views. You could just, pick up the argument and, make it. So, like, whether it's inconsistent, whether one of the premises is inconsistent with one of Hume's other views is not obviously all that relevant to anything. I mean, the rest of us can still make the argument, who have the much more common view that you can empirically show that it's impossible to violate laws of nature. But again, going back to Ethan's first point, I don't know why we need to show that. Like, we could just say, yes, all of our evidence shows that dead people stay dead. So the prior probability of a particular dead person coming back to life is just fantastically low. And, whatever that's like, Lucy is the most honest person ever. She would never tell a fib, and you can just tell how level-headed she is. And so, Lucy says she saw the fairies in the garden, Lucy says she saw the guy, come back to life. Like, okay, I mean, Lucy surprising you or doing something you think is really out of character for her is surely less intrinsically unlikely than dead people coming back to life.
Yeah. And it's also like, this is kind of like somewhat like tangential, but also relates to something Dinesh said, which is like, this kind of is not that significant a point, but he did say something like, Stephen Jay Gould said that religion deals with values and science deals with facts, and so they can really be reconciled. And Dinesh D'Souza is like, but what about miracles? Or he says, like, Dawkins is like, but what about miracles? Surely those are factual claims. But it's like, I'm pretty sure like miracle claims, strictly speaking, aren't the only factual claims that like most religions make. Like, it seems like there's a whole host of factual claims that you could appeal to like disagree with that sort of claim.
Yeah, I mean, the universe was created and is ruled by a supernatural entity certainly seems to be a factual claim. For example, that's pretty wild to think that like miracles are the one place that this is gonna that religious claims are gonna enter into the domain of facts. And I mean, also, like, as somebody who likes moral philosophy, I think Gould ceding values. It's like, oh, that's just the territory of religion. Let's not try to apply secular reasoning to that. I'm not crazy about either. Although, which is funny because I honestly, overall, I like Stephen Jay Gould a lot more than I like most of the other figures that you just mentioned. I'm just not really sold on that particular argument. All right. So let's switch gears a little bit here. I want to do Jake, do you want to load up the AI one? All right, this one's actually a spicy thing. We might have disagreement here, but it's, can artificial intelligence produce computers that think like humans do?
Yeah, this is Ethan's favorite topic.
We all know that artificial intelligence is used today in all kinds of things. It can compose music. It can write medium-level op-eds. But it has all kinds of commercial applications. It's used, for example, in business processing. Obviously, it's capable of astonishing feats of calculation. Now, none of this is particularly new, or by new, I mean it's not new in principle. We've known that there are machines that can do things, there's technology that can do things that human beings can't do. And this has been known for eons, long before the computer. For example, an abacus can calculate perhaps faster than a child or even a human being. And that's been known for centuries. A forklift has strength that human beings don't have. It can lift all kinds of stuff that human beings couldn't dream of lifting, or even a normal calculator can do transactions far more complicated, can multiply giant numbers in seconds, something that, except for a few human savants, a normal person, even an intelligent person, can't do. But the question is, and this has always been the dream of AI, going back now 50 years or about 50 years, can AI function intelligently like a human being? Can artificial intelligence think? Now, when Deep Blue, the computer, was able to beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, several years ago, and today, by the way, the best computers can beat any human player. Many people thought, oh, well, that's proof computers can think. But it's not really proof of that, because there's a finite number of squares on a board. And even though there's a large number of potential moves, that number is finite. So computers that can do millions or tens of millions or billions of calculations can obviously, through sheer brute calculating force, outplay a human being at chess. Even though there are elements of strategy and creativity involved in chess, those are not good enough to overcome, you may say, brute complex calculation. But in AI labs around the country, the most famous of which the MIT lab, they were always trying to create computers that can function normally, a kind of artificial intelligence system that can operate, for example, like somebody attending a birthday party, in which you could say to the computer, in effect, what's going on here? It's a birthday party. What's going to be served next? Cake. Why are there balloons? Because it's a birthday. So in other words, the computer, quote, understands what that event is about and what's going on in that room. Now, Hubert Dreyfus, the Berkeley philosopher I've been talking about, has a brother who is an applied mathematician at the Rand Corporation. And Rand, which is a government-funded entity, was building this artificial intelligence program. But Hubert Dreyfus's brother went to the head of the Rand Corporation and said, my brother, Hubert Dreyfus, doesn't think this is going to work. And he doesn't think this is going to work for, let's call it, Heideggerian reasons. In other words, the point that Heidegger makes is that we're not thinking beings that are subjects, that look at objects and go, oh, there's an object. It has this kind of weight, color, mass. I'm now going to make a representation of that object in my mind. And this is really the model for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence thinks that it can function like a human mind. Why? Because it thinks that this is what the human mind does. The human mind sort of abstracts itself or pulls itself away from the world, takes a picture of the world out there, names the different objects that are, let's say, in the room, and decides that if that's a balloon and that's a kid with a hat on and a little badge, that's the birthday boy, and everybody else is there to celebrate the birthday party. So you put all these inputs into the computer, and the computer, quote, knows what's going on. But Hubert Dreyfus's point is no computer can ever really do that. And the RAND Corporation was sort of astonished when they heard this. They commissioned this fellow, Hubert Dreyfus, to write a paper that was so devastating that when it was published, RAND decided, we're not going to put our name on it. We're not even going to distribute it. Why? Because they were afraid, Hubert Dreyfus says, that they would lose their government contracts to continue with this research. In other words, what's the point of continuing the research if the funders of the research discover this project is doomed to fail? And kind of the same thing happened at MIT, where they had a big AI lab and they were trying to build computers that work, that think. And they came to Hubert Dreyfus, who was teaching temporarily at MIT for a while, and they told him, hey, Hubert, you know what? You philosophers have been trying to figure out the human mind for 2,000 years, and you've gotten pretty much nowhere. Well, we figured it out. We, the scientists, have beaten you at your own game, and we're making a human mind, which is to say we're making a computer that mirrors the human mind. And again, Hubert Dreyfus goes, that's never going to work. And it's true that in the 70s, of course, the computers were kind of primitive, but the great hope of AI was, listen, as we put more inputs, in other words, not thousands of pieces of information, but hundreds of thousands and millions, maybe even billions, the computer basically becomes a human mind and can think. But again, Dreyfus's point is, for Heideggerian reasons, that will never work. Why? Because we human beings are beings already in the world. We have what can be called a background knowledge of the world that no amount of information fed into a computer can possibly comprehend.
All right, Ethan, you sold?
I don't even know what he was trying to sell me on. It's not even clear.
Yeah, that was really unclear. So I will say Herbert Dreyfus is actually awesome. I'm someone who studies phenomenology in my own academic work, and I would say that Dinesh D'Souza's explanation of what Herbert Dreyfus was up to was totally garbage. And like, you know, there is like little grains that are true, but I mean, I would say Dreyfus also draws as much on Heidegger as he does on Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and to talk about the importance of embodiment to subjectivity, the importance of the fact that most of our phenomenological experience in the world doesn't have to do with kind of representational experience, but rather our embodiment makes us sort of sensitive to the world habitually in a way that can't really be reduced to kind of propositional knowledge, sort of like the way when you're driving, right? Like you're not rationally thinking and calculating, your kind of body just gets caught up in the act because you have developed through skillful coping a kind of embodied relationship to the world, which kind of computational accounts of representational intelligence can't really take into account. It's been a long time since I've read that essay, and I'm probably not going to be able to explain it clearly, but there's more to it than what D'Souza is.
I think you already did way better than Dinesh, because what I got out of his explanation was computers can't think because of Heidegger.
Yeah, it was embarrassingly bad. I think the only thing that he said that was kind of right was about representational knowledge, because it's true that I think the way Dreyfus takes up kind of Heideggerian coping with the world and being in the world is that, you know, being an embodied agent is much more related to kind of embodied practical knowledge and less than like kind of representational knowledge, right? Where we build a representation of something in our mind. That's true that Dreyfus does kind of want to go up against what he calls the representationalist account of subjectivity. But the rest is like total ravings. I would agree with you. It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, most of it just seemed to be like, hey, here's a guy who doesn't think that computers will be able to do this stuff. And you know, the implication is that you should agree with him, but most of the reasons why you should agree with him were a little unclear to me. But yeah,
totally unclear. And like I think, Yeah, like the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm kind of remembering that, yeah, the RAND thing was because back then the model of AI was to try to just build a representational model of the world. And then if you can build an accurate enough representational model, then like all of a sudden the AI will be able to think. And I think if that's your model of AI, I think Dreyfus is right. That's not really like the right way of thinking about where intelligence comes from, that there's, you know, more kind of going on there than just representational kind of like propositional knowledge of like facts about the world. But there is kind of an interactive embodied engagement that I think is implicated in intelligence, that like our intelligence in the world is a consequence of our like embodied engagement with the world, or at least there's some important aspect of what makes human intelligence the thing that it is, that has to do with our embodiment, that I remember it was a while when I read that paper, I did find convincing.
I mean, it's worth so I guess like one point is like it's hard to consider these kinds of arguments because in large part like the cognitive structure of like AI systems and like how they reason and so on, and like what their model of the world looks like, largely we just kind of don't know. We basically just like train AIs through like processes of trial and errors and then create some sort of like inscrutable digital neural network that performs the tasks we want it to perform. But it's not like we have like a worked out digital neuroscience or cognitive science for AIs yet. But I would just say like, yeah, and to the extent that like embodiment really matters, I'm not sure how. I guess I would need to know, like, you know, what Dreyfus's considerations are and stuff in favor of that view. I guess I don't find it that intuitively plausible, like, immediately. But then I would also mention, like, it seems like on that sort of view, like, as long as we in the near future are able to give AIs, like, you know, like sensors and like actuators in some sense, then maybe that counts as like embodiment, and then maybe the argument goes away.
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. You know, that movie, Ex Machina, by the way,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, the one of the writers or the writer was actually influenced by Dreyfus in that movie, because like he has a whole bit about how you have to give this AI a body if you want it to be kind of like having a human like intelligence. And he even says, like in the movie, I think there's even something about like some kind of sexual desire element, that like it has to have some kind of like an embodied desiring relationship to the world if you want the intelligence to be comparable to what a human intelligence is like. But I do agree with you, Ethan, that like, you know, the model right now of AI is totally different than trying to in advance give an AI system propositional knowledge about the world, which was what they were trying to do back then. And instead you just kind of give it a training algorithm, and then you give it feedback about like right or wrong, but you have no idea like what, right. Like you said, there's not really like a neuroscience of this. It's more just like a trial and error. So I think that's different than what they were trying to do back then, for sure.
Yeah, I do just want to say, by the way, off topic, but I fucking love Ex Machina. That movie doesn't get nearly enough love. It's like the sort of combination of high concept science fiction and being like so ridiculously tightly constructed. It's like a one-act play. Like there are like 3 characters who have speaking lines in the entire movie.
Yeah. And one of them is the AI, I think.
One of them is the AI,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I really want to watch Ex Machina again now. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, I mean, I'm even somebody who, in some sense, should be an easy mark for this argument, because I'm not. I mean, skeptical is probably too strong a word, but I mean, like, I am sometimes frustrated by conversations about AI because people just take it. People seem to take it as obvious that like this or that AI breakthrough will happen in the future, and it's not, and it's often not obvious to me, right? That it's like, well, no, I kind of want to hear a little bit more of an argument for why you think that specific thing is going to happen. But Dinesh seems to be doing something different. He seems to be wanting to make an impossibility argument. It's like, no, this is like just innately silly to think that this could happen. And if you're going to make an impossibility argument, I mean, okay, if it's just you need embodiment, then yeah, I mean, that doesn't like.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I got to say too, To be
Yeah.
fair, to be like clear about Dreyfus too, I don't think that he was making the impossibility argument either. He was kind of responding to what AI thinkers were doing at the time, and he was taking his knowledge of phenomenology and saying, if you want something that's like a human intelligence, like you need to understand this process of like the phenomenology of human subjectivity, that it's not all propositional knowledge. But I don't think he was making a strong claim like it's impossible because of this. He's just saying like what they're doing over there at the Rand Corporation, isn't the path. And I think he might have written 2 versions of the book. I think he wrote. I think his book was called like "What Computers Can't Do" or something like that. And then he might have written another one that was like "What Computers Still Can't Do" later in like the 90s or something. And kind of an interesting side fact about Dreyfus is he was actually in the same department as Searle. And they were both kind of writing anti-AI books, but from completely kind of not opposed, but very different traditions, right? Obviously, Searle's extremely analytic philosopher, and obviously Dreyfus is drawing on kind of existential phenomenology to make his argument. But apparently, they weren't very friendly, even though they were both kind of on the same team.
Yeah, I mean, I also just wanted to say, like, it's kind of I'm trying to engage with the argument without really knowing exactly what the argument is in much detail, but like, to the extent that the concern is just, it seems unlikely that AI will have a form of intelligence or understanding that's highly analogous to human intelligence understanding. I feel like people who, get worked up about AI, whether that be in a positive direction or in a negative direction, they could just say like, fine, maybe what the AI does is totally disanalogous to human intelligence, but it's just like it's optimizing some algorithm or it's optimizing some utility function in a highly effective way, even though it's not doing it in the same way that humans optimize our utility functions. But like as long as it's doing that and it's doing it effectively, then it seems like AI could have really good or really bad consequences if developed far enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the perspective of the AI safety stuff that we were arguing about on Call In, like you could just say, if you told me that there was a fleet of alien spaceships hurtling towards Earth right now, and you said, "Oh, but don't worry, their brains are completely different from ours and like it's suitable to us," you would say, "Okay, never mind then. Like this is fine. I have no concerns about what's going to happen when they land."
Did the aliens even understand the the internal operations of their UFOs?
Yeah. All right. Well, while we are on tech, Jake, if we have the digital moguls Nietzsche one, I really wanted to make sure we got to this. So this is so Heidegger has taught us that computers can't think. I think that Nietzsche is going to show us something about how did the digital moguls become such tyrannical monsters.
I can't wait.
How did the digital moguls, tech moguls, become such tyrannical monsters? How did the people who positioned themselves to be the great enemies of the dictatorial state, of, you may say, Big Brother of 1984, how did they become Big Brother? How did they become you can call it Big Brotherhood of 6 or 10 guys who essentially want to control, manipulate, regulate, censor, suppress, and destroy? I think back to that wonderfully liberating Apple commercial of 1984, which talked about 1984, talked about Orwell, and talked about fighting against Big Brother. Here's a little glimpse of it.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Now, this commercial is fascinating, and if you watch the whole thing, which you can online, you'll see that they start off with the whole concept of the big state. You've got Big Brother himself, and Big Brother's talking about everyone having, quote, one will, the unification of thoughts. Big Brother is talking about, quote, a garden of pure ideology. Everybody is locked into the same ideology. And then what happens? you basically see a young woman running up to the screen and smashing it with a hammer. And then you have these liberating words. Apple will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. Talk about false promises. We are moving toward 1984. And guess what? These very tech moguls are taking us there. They are the face of Big Brother. They are Big Brother. So it makes you begin to think about, how did people who were, harmless nerds and little bohemians and people who liked alternative food and yoga and thought of themselves as rebelling against the state, how did they become these monsters? What happened to them? What happened to that hippie sensibility, that bohemian love of freedom, that sense of wanting to be left alone and do your own thing? I think the answer to this can be found, well, in two things. One is in the movie Revenge of the Nerds, a movie about a bunch of misfits and, I would say, uncool cats who decide to strike back against all the cool people and have their revenge for all the injuries that have been foisted on them. The philosopher Nietzsche, my second source, calls this ressentiment, resentment. And for Nietzsche, ressentiment is more than resentment. It is this kind of gnawing hatred that grows in your soul that makes you want to avenge yourself. It creates a deep sense of injury, of victimization. And this, Nietzsche says, can take terrible and tyrannical forms. By the way, Adolf Hitler was a bohemian. I discussed this in my book, The Big Lie. Hitler came of age in the Schwabing bohemian neighborhoods around Munich. Remember, Hitler was an artist. He was a painter. He hung out with these guys, but he had this deep sense of injury and grievance directed against the Jews. I have a scene in the movie Death of a Nation where you see Hitler taking his revenge, striking out in this case against one of his rivals, Ernst Röhm, who was the head of the brown shirts. Here it is.
Some progressives try to portray Hitler as a right-winger by insisting he was anti-gay. But Hitler knew that the brown shirt leader, Ernst Röhm, was a notorious homosexual, as were many other brown shirts. When Hitler showed up to arrest Röhm, he encountered a remarkable scene.
Allmannsche! Röhm, Sie sind verhaftet! Sie sind ein Verräter!
Röhm publicly suggested that he, not Hitler, was the true leader of the Nazi Party.
Hey, Junge!
When Heinrich Himmler urged Hitler to purge the gay brown shirts out of the Nazi movement, Hitler refused.
Some of this, of course, is in German, but I'll interpret it for you. Basically,
All
Hitler
right,
comes
pause
to
this for a
arrest
second.
Rome, and he finds himself in the middle of a kind of an order.
I really do just want to take 30 seconds on the beauty of, some people think that Hitler was anti-gay. Perhaps they think this on the basis of the fact that homosexuality was illegal in Nazi Germany and gay men were sent to death camps. But did you know that some Nazis were gay and Hitler knew about it?
That's so that's his basis for saying that he wasn't right wing or something. Am I following, or is there more to come here? That
so far that's the reason he's given us for thinking
okay
right wing,
because it's just right away off the top of my head I'm like, what about all those conservative Republicans who ended up being caught in bathroom stalls? What
not right wing either.
Not right wing either, I guess, right? Secretly not right wing.
Yeah.
Or all those priests, those evangelical priests who ended up I guess not secretly also not gay. Yeah,
there you go.
If every secretly gay Republican was actually voted left wing, we'd live in a much better country.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the right wing organizations that are publicly anti-gay, having gay members and people know it, or gay leaders even, and people knowing about it is not a historically unusual situation.
Yeah, it's a strange basis to make ideological conclusions from.
Yeah. All right, let's roll.
Orgy. Why? Because these brown shirts were themselves bohemians. It was all part of this bohemian culture, but a bohemian culture suffused with resentment. Let's come back to Revenge of the Nerds, because if you look at these tech moguls and you go into their backgrounds, I've looked at some of their high school pictures. These guys were total misfits. Even Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs was a loner. According to Walter Isaacson in his very fine biography of Jobs, Jobs was regularly bullied in school. He became a kind of a hermit, and he'd go hang out in a garage and basically play on the computer, play on little machines, work on technology, which was his refuge from humanity. And this is true of all these other guys, Dorsey and Zuckerberg, nerds to the core. And I'm sure that as nerds, they were treated as nerds. And high school and middle school even can be really cruel. People look down on you. And so they had all these little injuries that they gathered because they were seen as uncool and they were seen as freaks. Get away from me. And they nursed their grievances. But see, here's the problem. When you nurse your grievances, you resolve, I'm going to get those people one day. When I get strong and powerful, I'll have my revenge. But see, the problem is when you get older, all those people are gone. All those frat boys and sorority girls and members of exclusive clubs and pom-pom girls and cheerleaders and football stars and big man on campus, all those people have gone on with their lives. There's no one to get, so to speak. And so you have to displace your anger onto something else. And you know what they displace it on? Americana, because they identify fraternities and sororities and football games with America. And so later on, they package this resentment and then they displace it. Imagine, for example, a Trump rally. They go, oh, did you see the violent rhetoric that Trump used at the rally? I mean, it flashes their mind back to high school pep rallies. I mean, think of a nerd. What does a nerd do at a high school pep rally? He's not welcome. The best he can do is operate the audio-visual equipment. He's outside the rally. And so you look at Trump, and Trump's violent rhetoric reminds me of the time that Sally Clemson gave me a violent look and told me, get away, you freak. Or think about the time, for example, Trump's incendiary tweets remind me of the time that Roberto Rivera tripped me in 7th grade. What you're dealing with here are social misfits who have grown up, but they're still social misfits. And here's the irony. The social misfits are running social media. They're controlling our social lives. And if you listen to their testimony, their conversation, these are people ultimately living in a different zone. They don't relate to other people all that well, even now. And all this tyranny, all this censorship, all this desire for maniacal control comes out of nothing more than the fact that these people were treated badly when they were younger, and they're determined to strike back.
Ben, what have you got me watching here on a Monday night?
I mean, I guess my first thought is that I'm not sure Dinesh D'Souza actually watched Revenge of the Nerds. Because, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this movie, but like, listening to his description, you'd think that like the guys in Revenge of the Nerds like commit genocide at the end of the movie. It's a really light movie. They don't do anything that bad to anybody. I mean, there are some like pranks, but I mean, like this, nobody's hurt particularly, as far as I can recall, in Revenge of the Nerds. And I think like one of them starts dating one of the sorority girls at the end. Like, it's all pretty happy and innocent. But in any case, so that said, I'm still trying to figure out the argument here. Why is it that Nietzsche said that sometimes people resent each other, which apparently is an original Nietzsche insight.
Yeah. Well, I guess I mean, I guess it goes back to, because I think the argument in like Beyond Good and Evil, or maybe it's more the genealogy of morality, right, is this idea that Christianity can be explained as a kind of slave morality, that it was kind of a revenge on like the great souls that were doing like awesome stuff, basically, that were, the few great human beings who were, writing great literature and basically being winners. And then like Christianity is just a bunch of resentful like slave morality people who are like, let's with our majority basically create a religion that will dominate the world, that kind of says everyone's equal and kind of hides the fact that there are actually like awesome people who, and Nietzsche's kind of the whole thing. I mean, I'm kind of butchering the argument a little bit here, but I think Nietzsche's whole thing here is like that, that, he's arguing for those great souls, those philosophers of the future who can come back and kind of, exert and be exemplary of human potentiality. And that Christianity is like a slave morality based on ressentiment of the population who can't basically be awesome, can't be, Chads or whatever, thing, whatever, contemporary parlance we want to use. And Christianity is like the embodiment of this kind of ressentiment slave morality. So I guess he's saying that tech people, because that like are creating a new, I don't know, like through their corporations. I don't know. I'm not sure the parallel like really makes sense, because I've also seen like kind of like tech adjacent theory interested people. Maybe like, I don't know if it's Curtis Yarvin or one of these other people, kind of make the argument that these tech people are actually like the great souls, right? They are doing the great things in society.
Yeah,
they're not actually a ressentiment. So it's kind of, I don't know how the argument really works.
I mean, Curtis Yarvin's whole thing is that he wants like one of the tech CEOs to like become the American CEO and like overcome democracy and be our Augustus.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. The parallel doesn't really make that much sense to me. I mean, he only mentions Nietzsche very briefly at the beginning, and then just basically talks about how, these tech people are just nerds trying to get revenge or something.
Yeah, I really liked how it took Dinesh like 8 minutes to basically just say like, yeah, I got banned off Facebook because like Mark Zuckerberg is like a jealous loser.
Yeah, but he said ressentiment, so there's like layers to the analysis there. It's really deep.
He's really good at doing these arguments that are like because of Nietzsche or like for Heideggerian reasons, right? Like without explaining anything about like what the relevance of those people is to the argument.
Like, tell me, what are the Nietzschean reasons? What are the Heideggerian reasons?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like, okay, so they want to have the tech CEOs were stuffed into lockers. Just going to forgo any speculation about Dinesh's own relationship to that, but and therefore they want revenge on the world. But like, why would that manifest specifically through the stuff that he's complaining about? I mean, like why that, right? I mean, if you want to, I mean, I guess just like you should. The closest I heard was a suggestion that Donald Trump saying incendiary things reminded them of times that the pom-pom girls rejected them or whatever.
I mean, it kind of just sounds like the reason like Twitter has terms of service is because like it's nerds getting revenge or something like that.
Yeah. They saw somebody saying that, say in the chat, there was a sexual assault and revenge of the nerds. Yes and no. There's like a character who is like wearing like a Darth Vader mask, so the other character didn't know who they were when they were having sex with them, and that's it's like in that sense there's sexual assault all over like Shakespeare, because like that kind of like identity, like extremely implausible identity confusion, is all over the place in Shakespeare in similar context. So whatever, however you want to classify that, but
if you look back at any of those 80s comedy movies, I feel like they're, through modern eyes, you're going to find things that are like a little, that'll make you shudder a little bit.
Yeah. Right. So it's not a, it's not a particularly grim scene, let's say that. Yeah, I just it's a really like I feel like actually we went in descending order of quality. This is not on purpose, but like the Hume one, at least he was engaging a fair amount with like actual arguments made by David Hume. It seems like what he got out of Dreyfus was that for Heideggerian reasons, he thought computers get big, and he seemed really smart and on point to Dinesh, so therefore computers get big. And then this one, it's I think Mark Zuckerberg is just a loser who's trying to get revenge by banning me from Facebook, and like there's just the most half-assed possible attempt to relate this to Nietzsche. Like if he actually had said the thing about slave morality, like that might have gotten interested. I mean, I guess it's sort of hovering there around the edges. He doesn't quite spell it out. But there are more of these. We just picked three. Dinesh's philosophical productivity has been unflagging on Rumble. But we do need to go to the post game for patrons. So watch Victor, listen to Victor on Plastic Pills podcast. Watch Ethan on his YouTube channel, Confronting Capital. And when's the new podcast, The Academic Edgelords? When's that started?
Probably in June, we're going to release the first episode. And also worth mentioning, Matt McManus is also part of that, as well as Gordon Caddick, who's been on once. But Matt McManus has been on lots of times, so the audience should know who that is.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, he's the guy who's always in like if Cat Turd ever writes a book, he'll that's the guy who's going to review it for Jacobin.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So yeah, I'm gonna go to the post game. Our live show producer Jordan is going to be joining us to break down some articles that have appeared in Compact Magazine. One by Zizek on multipolarity, which is kind of a criticism of the view that is manifested in a really extreme way. The other one by this guy from Tablet, who thinks that the mass protests in Israel, where Jordan lived for many years, were a Western engineered color revolution, which is kind of a beautiful reductio of that whole way of being an anti-imperialist. So we're going to get into all of that. We might also touch on the Zizek compact article on wokeness. So only way to find out is become a give them an argument patron, patreon.com/Ben Burgess, $5 a month. Get access to every single patron exclusive post game after the regular Monday night episodes. The Discord server, yes, I did see the message, the stuff on the AI argument there I need to look at, and many, many other good things, but most importantly, our eternal love and gratitude for keeping that thing going. So if you are a patron, you should already have the email with the post game link, or if you don't see the email, just go to the Patreon. You should see that. We're going to be back there in about 90 seconds to do the post game. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Victor. Left is best.